Well, a new poll from NBC News and Telemundo finds that Democrats' advantage with Latino voters has declined since previous election cycles. Over half of Latino voters say they want Democrats to control Congress after the 2024 elections versus 33% who want Republicans in charge. Democrats' 21-point Democratic lead in congressional preference is actually down from past NBC Telemundo polls of Latino voters, including a whopping 21 points since October 2012. Joining me now to weigh in is staff writer at The Hill, Rafael Bernal. Rafael, so great to see you.
Hey, it's great to be on.
So I think that difference from 2012 to now is so important as we talk about, the shifting Latino vote, because if you flash back to 2012, that's the height of the Obama years, a time where Democrats and Democratic strategists were very confident that due to demographic change and immigration, the Democratic Party was headed towards some kind of permanent majority because of that strategy. Now we're 10 years later, and that looks shakier than ever. And I wonder what you think is the big reason for that change.
Well, if you remove all nuance, which, as a warning, you should not ever do, but the big reason, if you do remove all nuance, you had in 2012 a U.S. president who was promising big changes on immigration, despite, yes, being the deporter-in-chief. You had Democrats on one side on immigration, Republicans on the other side. On top of that, let's start adding some layers of nuance. You had an economic policy where Democrats were known as the party of the working class. Still a very large segment of Latino voters were and are working class. You had sort of these startups of what eventually became Donald Trump's immigration policy that at the time sounded really racist. Maybe some argue they should still sound racist today, but they don't. They're very mainstream today. And crucially, you had fewer Latinos voting. Right back then and up until 2018, when that sort of changed, the big question among Latino politics and Latino campaign consultants was, how do we get people out to the polls? People are not participating. People are not registering, crucially. That has somewhat changed, and in both directions. More people want to register, but also many states have made it harder for people to register. So people who aren't participating are sort of completely edged out of the electoral landscape.
I think there are a lot of presumptions made about Latino voters, presumptions the Democratic Party has made, or maybe not even, it might not actually even be fair to say the Democratic Party, but some of the thought leaders who become representative of it in elite institutions of higher education, on social media, et cetera, the kind of pundits, and you see this on other news channels, cable news channels that are progressive or mainstream. I have seen, for instance, the gender neutral sort of language applied to Latino voters, the Latinx sort of thing. Is that a huge issue motivating a ton of voters? I suspect not, but I think it may be indicative of a kind of misunderstanding of what the cultural priorities or how far left your average Latino voter might be. I don't think it is nearly as far as people who are speaking to their issues or purport to represent them on TV, and that maybe that disconnect has negatively affected Democratic outreach to the community.
There's a lot of caricature of cultural competency, I would say. That you're right that I saw a video yesterday where a guy was dressed in big sombrero and a shawl and all that, and asked a bunch of people at a college campus whether that was offensive. They all said yes, and then went to a Latino neighborhood and asked whether it was offensive, and most people kind of just laughed at him and went, "No, not really." So there's a lot of.
It's a great example.
And it's a lot of misunderstanding how many Latinos, especially recent arrivals, because let's remember that second or third generation will have a lot more of the will see this through the same lens as a majority of Americans, and might actually say, like, yeah, that's culturally incompetent. You're appropriating. That's bad. But the more recent arrivals, it's more about jobs, and you see it in every poll. Like, the economy has consistently been number one, with Latinos. Number two and number three are always healthcare and education. The environment is up there. And one warning, everybody, most of these pundits you're talking about, left and right, they love to say, see, immigration is no longer an issue for Latinos. Latinos don't care about immigration. It's number five or less. I think one part of what they're missing is that Latinos have proven and really proven to be very strong issues voters. And as issues voters, they know immigration reform is not in the cards. So I don't think a Latino voter who's even relatively well informed is going to say immigration is their number one priority, because they're voting for things that they can get. They can get a candidate who represents them better on the economy. They can get a candidate who prioritizes education or healthcare. They are very unlikely to get a candidate who will, untie the knot on immigration reform.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what the Republican Party is maybe doing. Is there enough awareness in the party that, hey, if we do outreach to these voters, we're doing better with them by default. Maybe we should concentrate more of our efforts here. We could be even more successful with them. Yeah, talk about how, the Biden economy is affecting Latino voters, maybe making them harder to get jobs, maybe the price of food and gas, et cetera, is, outside the bound. Talk about those things specifically to Latino communities. Are Republicans doing that, or are they still in the kind of previous mindset of, we don't have immigrant voters, minority voters, they don't support us, so we're not going to speak to them, and we would actually try to keep as many of them out of the country as we possibly could because they're not our voters? A thinking that is so outdated and so wrong, but is that sinking in with the Republican Party?
So Republicans are doing a couple things really, really well. The first one is they noticed that Democrats are doing a bad job at reaching out to the voters that they should have an easy time convincing of voting for Democrats. Basically, why were Latinos not voting when Latinos were overwhelmingly Democratic? They still are overwhelmingly Democratic, but even more so, they weren't voting because nobody was reaching out to them. Campaigns weren't spending a cent on them. And Republicans, it took them a couple decades to realize this, but now that they've realized it, they're putting real money and real investment where Democrats haven't historically, where Democrats have, taken Latinos for granted. It sounds like a platitude, but it's kind of true. So they're doing that very well, and then they're moving issues toward them. But I think it's an exaggeration when they say that, the old Reagan phrase that Hispanics are Republicans, or conservatives, they just don't know it yet. That's probably an exaggeration for a majority of Latinos, as it might be true for some, especially evangelical Latinos. But they're making. They're sort of molding issues. So immigration and the border are no longer about let's keep them out. It's about, look at this chaos, let's make our communities safer. That's a very good spin. It's lost on few people who are paying attention that Republicans are still calling for building a wall, which basically says everything on that side of the wall is rotten. Not the best message to send to somebody who just came over from Mexico, but maybe somebody who doesn't want to, who really fled Mexico, doesn't want to know about their home country anymore. Maybe that is a good message. And they're really chipping away at the sides. And Republicans are very keenly aware of one more thing that's crucially important. They don't need to get to 40 or 45% with Latinos, and they most likely will not, because for a variety of reasons we've discussed. But if they get to a consistent 35, then they've chipped away at the advantage that Democrats have, especially in key races in places like Georgia and places like Arizona. And even, you don't think about it much with Latinos, but they're very important in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Well, the trajectory is so favorable for Republicans, and I think if they keep talking to Latinos, or to do more of it, on issues like, the economy and crime, probably another big one, they would make just tremendous strides there. And like you said, you don't have to win them all, you don't have to win the majority, but doing a lot better than they were doing could really totally change the electoral map for midterms, for the next election cycle, et cetera. Rafael Bernal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be on.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.